Right then, in this video we're going to be talking about safety in hobbies that have got certain risks to them. Things like lift surfing and train surfing. But not only those, also mainstream hobbies such as rock climbing and abseiling and boating, which I'd argue the same equally applies to those hobbies, because on mainstream hobbies people generally understand the concept. The hobbies have risks, but you can learn the hobby, you can then achieve that hobby by educating yourself and then building up skill in the hobby. In hobbies such as rock climbing and sailing, you regularly get young people doing the hobbies, and it's seen as a good thing when they've built up the skill to be able to achieve that hobby. Yet on other hobbies which are less widely accepted, like lift surfing and train surfing, these hobbies are always looked at as being dangerous, terrible, bad, daredevil hobbies. And it's time we need to address this. Because let's be honest, the hobby of sailing is more dangerous than the hobby of lift surfing. There are more risks being out in the open water with currents, strong winds, and you're exposed to the elements, controlling a boat just by the wind, which has a lot of skill to it. There's more to that, and there's more risks to that than lift surfing. And people accept you can build up the skill to do sailing, although I'd also argue that sailing is such a widely accepted hobby, a lot of people don't even fully understand the dangers of it, and I'll come on to more about that later on. But with things like my hobby of lift surfing, people always view that as if it's some sort of dangerous hobby. So let's address this situation and have a full discussion about that. With the hobby of lift surfing, it is essential that you understand it fully, and there's a lot more to it than simply opening up the lift, putting it on inspection and going on top it. There's a case of understanding it from the basic safety principles of never leaning over the edge, moving parts and stuff like that. But you've also got the issue of verifying things, considering you're working with a machine that you do not know its situation, so you must make sure each feature of the lift is working as intended before you ever allow a situation to occur where you're then dependent on that feature working, such as if you jump on top of a lift running in normal and it drives down to somewhere where you can't reach a door roller and you haven't got inspection verified, you don't know if inspection is going to work, so you should never put yourself in that kind of situation. I know in a couple of my videos I've done it, but that's because I've got the skill to understand the situation. If you're new to it, that's a completely different subject. Then, on top of that, there's the issue of every lift logic being different, and that's one of the reasons why I find the hobby so interesting. How one model of lift logic would respond to certain scenarios, especially fault scenarios, will be wildly different to how a different lift logic responds to it. So before you go on top any lift, you need to know exactly the quirks and differences in that lift logic compared to others, so you never get caught out by some of the glitches and issues that some lift logics have. So, to be very clear, what this means is that when you're on top of a lift, every single thing a lift does, you should be anticipating. And if ever the lift does a single thing and you did not anticipate or expect that to happen, that means you have not been keeping track of the lift, and that is an error of your judgment. And if such an error of your judgment happens, you should work towards understanding what went wrong and making sure that should never happen again. And that is the basic principle of how lift surfing should be done safely. The issue now is that lift surfing is quite a niche hobby. There's not many people doing it, and to be able to do it safely you need to be able to talk to other people so you can get advice on how to do it safe, as well as people being able to look out for other lift surfers, and if they see someone making a mistake or not doing something very safely, they can then advise them to do things better. The problem with that is it relies on the internet, and in the modern day the internet has become so toxic it feels like it's almost impossible to have a supportive, friendly community. And there's many lift or elevator enthusiasts out there who are hateful on people who lift surf. And they have no justifiable reason for this apart from saying it's trespassing, like fucking hell, who cares about trespass? And their main reason is because it's dangerous. Well, what they fail to understand is by hating on people, they make people want to do it in secret and not reach out, which makes the hobby more dangerous. And online there are many hateful people towards lift surfers, making people feel like they can't discuss it without being hated on, makes people push to do the hobby in secret. And for a hobby with certain dangers in it, you do not want people to be isolated, because if someone is isolated, that means there's no one out there looking out for that person to check up on them and make sure they're doing things safely. Now, another thing that needs to be mentioned around this subject is how big of a difference of opinion there is between certain people who preach on the internet to the people that want to do some of these hobbies that contain certain risks. And here is one example of this. Now, this particular YouTuber made a video where he was pressuring people to not use lift keys. And I'm not talking about a lift keys to open up the lift doors where there is certain safety issues around that. I'm talking about the lift keys to switch off the fan in the lift. It's literally the switching of the fan so a person can film a lift without the fan making a noise in the background. If someone wants to switch off a fan, why would that matter to anyone. Yet this particular YouTuber started preaching about this. And by the way, I'm not even saying I dislike this YouTuber. I actually like his videos and I actually feel he's a nice person, but on this particular occasion, what he did was wrong.
I gotta talk about something very serious, and this is a problem in the elevator enthusiast community. What I'm going to talk about today is the improper use of elevator keys. Turning off a fan or a light or something, that would be considered tampering, and if the building owner caught you, he could throw you out of the building.
And one thing that has to be mentioned is that this particular YouTuber actually used to use lift keys to switch off a fan himself. What he did next was even more wrong, as he went and called out an individual person just because they were using lift keys to switch off the fan.
There's only a couple users that I still see using elevator keys. And specifically, it's if you're watching this, I think it's Shih Tzu fan. I'm telling you, you seem like a good kid, but you gotta stop with the elevator keys. And you should take the videos down where you used them.
So what you see here is this YouTuber using the fact he's got a large following to pressure an individual person just because he didn't like the fact this person was using a key to switch off a fan temporarily so they could make a video. How this YouTuber tried to pressure an individual person in this clip was unacceptable. Now think about someone like myself who does far more things than just switching off fans in lifts. For someone doing things like I am, think about how his words are going to be seen and how much it will make the hobby feel like it's a hate-filled place. And that really shows how divided things have got. How could a hobby just about lifts have become so divided? So, why am I making this video now? Well, firstly, this video is long overdue. I should have said something years ago and I didn't get round to it. So now I really feel like something needs to be said about the current situation. I am sick of seeing people being hated on for having certain hobbies, especially on safety critical hobbies such as lift surfing. They are the most important things to be open and transparent so people can see what you're doing. So if you make a mistake, so there can be people out there that can then advise you on what you're doing wrong. If people start hating on others for having a hobby, it pushes people into doing it in secret, and that makes it more dangerous. And the thing that got me onto making this video is I was initially editing a different video about my new video series about Russian train surfing. And some of the things going on in Russia at the minute are absolutely crazy. And while planning out a video, I realised there's things around the subject of these sort of hobbies that needs to be said, which hasn't been said, and that's why I'm doing it now. So let's initially begin this video by talking about this new series. Then I'm going to move on to talking about safety in these hobbies and the fact that people do want to do these hobbies and that there should be room in society for people to be able to do certain hobbies that have certain risks in them. But let's start off with Russian train surfing. I've edited together a new video series about train surfing in Russia because the stuff going on there is stuff you just do not get to see anywhere else. And I've seen a lot of train surfing across the European Union and I've never seen anything like what happens in Russia. There are other countries with a lot of train surfing, such as Bangladesh, which I've previously made a video on. Now Bangladesh, in terms of sheer numbers of people, has the most train surfing because there's so many people doing it. But in terms of how far they actually go with what they're doing, Russia has to be the country in the entire world which has taken this hobby further than any other country. And the reason why I've made a video series on it is to archive and document it. Because of the political situation, which I'm sure I don't need to go into, because of the sanctions, people outside of Russia can't easily search for the stuff happening in Russia, and the people in Russia can't so easily upload their stuff to more global reaching video sites. And because of how interesting the Russian train surfing is, I feel like it's important to document it for the world to see, and that's why I've made the series. So click a link in the description to check out this new video series. And the thing is, when I see these video clips, to me, being someone that lives in the UK, these clips feel amazing. It is like nothing else I've ever seen. But at the same time, these video clips do make me feel a bit sad because they are living a life which I could never live because of what the UK is like. Now, thing is, regarding trespass, the UK is actually more lenient than most other countries because trespass is not a crime in the UK. I can trespass wherever I want and I feel I should be able to trespass. Building owners can tell me to leave, but that's pretty much it. However, when it's regarding railways, it's like the polar opposite. The UK goes from being one of the most lenient places regarding trespass to one of the most strictest places in the entire planet. People go crazy, the newspapers get really shocked if anyone dare goes anywhere near the railway. Even Germany's more lenient than the UK regarding things to do with railways. And it really is a different world over in Russia, because the amount of freedom they have, it's like an alien concept compared to what happens in the UK. However, I do need to talk about the safety aspects of this, the topic about this sort of subject matter and how to do it safely, and how this subject has become a very contentious subject amongst people's attitudes. Now, in Russia, there's a different attitude towards safety. There's more personal freedom, people's individual choice to take on their own responsibility for their own safety. And that's very different to the UK. However, things weren't always like that in the UK. I can remember when slam doors were still running. Things were very different. People would open up the doors of the trains while the train's pulling into the station, while the train was still going 30 miles an hour, and people would jump out of the train at speed. Seems like a completely different world back then. It's really not that long ago, yet it feels like a completely different world compared to today. When today, if you go anywhere near a railway, people will be horrified, let alone doing the sorts of things that the Russians are doing. And some people in the UK would be even more shocked because of the age of the train surfers in Russia. Most of them are teenagers, and occasionally even younger. And the thing is, there's always going to be certain people out there, if they saw that, they'd react something along the lines of, "The children are in danger! We must protect the children!" And it is utterly ridiculous and the wrong way to go about things. However, at the same time, there is the issue of what happens when something like train surfing becomes a craze. Because if too many people are train surfing and will go and attempt to copy without understanding it, and it's that which makes it dangerous, because then people do not know how much risk they're taking on. If they copy something without understanding it, they don't know the dangers they're putting themselves in, and that is when accidents happen. However, I strongly feel like that should not mean that the people that do understand what they're doing should have their freedom taken away. And I also disagree with this becoming an age discrimination issue, because while it might be said that many young people might not understand danger that well, that does not apply to everyone, because there are some young people that do understand it, because that's the thing they've set their mind to. That's a skill and something they want to achieve, and just because they're young, I don't think should be a reason to stop them. Although, in all honesty, I'd rather they didn't go alone, but instead went with someone with more experience than themselves. And you can't just look at someone because they're young and say, "Oh, they don't know what they're doing." Because I know for myself, when I was young, I did know what I was doing on the subjects I was interested in. When I was like 10 years old, I was obsessed with operating systems like Windows 98 and stuff like that. And I knew how these systems worked to the most minute detail. And some adults around me would deny that I knew much, because they'd be like, "He's just a child. He can't know what he's doing of." And because they did not understand the complexities of making custom DOS-based operating systems, which is what I was doing, they assumed that I could not be doing something complicated, because it was against their prejudice to think that a child like me could have been doing something technical and complicated. A point I'm making is, doing activities that involve a certain amount of risk, being able to do those activities safely, is dependent on the person doing it as an individual. And also, it actually applies to many other hobbies, such as sailing. And I've done both sailing and train surfing. And I can tell you one thing, sailing is equally as dangerous as train surfing. People underestimate how dangerous sailing is. You're exposed to the element. Water can be very strong with currents, sun, weather changes. Sailing is also extremely technical and more complicated, I'd say, than probably lift surfing or train surfing. So do not underestimate sailing. Yet, because sailing is a mainstream hobby, people accept it in a way they don't accept lift surfing and train surfing. For example, I've actually seen sailing clubs where young people have been trusted to take out a sailing boat on their own. And just for context, I'm not talking about some safe sailing lake. I'm talking about going out alone on the River Medway, a very strong, powerful tidal river with lots of hazards. And that's because, presumably, they've managed to demonstrate a level of skill to their sailing instructor, to a point where the sailing instructor's given them the responsibility, because them as an individual have reached a stage where they have that skill to take that boat out on their own. And that's how things should be. People accept that with sailing, so the exact same thing should be said about train surfing. It's based on the individual people, and that is based on them as individuals, not on some broad category put on them by categorising them by their age. Even if it's said that many young people won't be able to have that skill, it doesn't mean that all young people won't be able to build up the skill to do something safely. It's to do with them as an individual. And most importantly, importantly, people should not have their freedom taken away because of this over-obsession around the subjects of train surfing. The people in Russia have a sense of freedom, which is brilliant. They've achieved things that no one else in any other country I've ever seen achieve, and that should never be taken away from anyone. Yes, a lot of the people in Russia are very young, and many young people might not have the skills to do it safely. However, some young people do have that skill. In fact, I've even worked with some young people who have demonstrated they've got the skill and ability to do this. And if anyone makes an overly broad, generalised statement trying to say that the children are putting themselves in danger, if you make that statement purely because of their age and not because of their actions, then you are age discriminating. So then, let's now talk about the UK. The country where I am from. Let's talk about the issues around certain hobbies with certain dangers to them in my country. And let's talk about lift surfing. Now, in the UK, the hobby of lift surfing is often looked upon as being some sort of dangerous, risky, and newspapers often say daredevil hobby. And the people that say things like that usually don't have a clue what they're talking about. They don't understand the hobby. And when people make a misinformed statement, which is ultimately a simplification because they don't understand how the hobby works, that simplification is detrimental because it means that people then think they understand the hobby when they don't. And the most important thing about hobbies where there is certain risks involved is understanding it properly and fully. And any statement that simplifies stuff and misleads that people think the hobby is something slightly different than it is means that people are less informed, which actually makes it more dangerous. So then, as for the subject of newspapers, and to be honest, some of the newspaper articles, especially in the local papers, are completely inaccurate, full of incorrect facts. But what's worse is not just the local newspapers, but the BBC. They even made a news article about lift surfers in Nottingham, full of untrue facts, like claims that a lift suddenly dropped 3 floors, which is ridiculous. And then this sentence: they're not only putting their own lives at risk, but everyone else's. That statement is simply untrue. Now, talking about hobbies with dangers, there's many other hobbies that people do which people completely overlook the dangers to them. Hobbies which have even become a normal part of society, and people no longer view these hobbies as dangerous in the same way that they would compared to lift surfing. And one of the biggest examples of that is driving cars too fast, which has become normalised in society. So many people seem to act like it's a good thing to drive cars dangerously, and it is tolerated by society. And driving cars too fast is more dangerous than lift surfing. When you're on the road, you cannot control all those hazards around you. There will be unexpected hazards which you cannot predict. And that is different to a lift shaft where you can fully control the environment you are in. And one thing I cannot stand is sports cars. People look up to sports cars like as some sort of good thing or a status symbol, when actually sports cars are overpriced and useless as cars. They've only got 2 seats, so they're impractical. They use more fuel to get to where you're going, so they're expensive to run. They cost more to maintain, and they don't last as long as a regular car. And as well as being terrible vehicles, they are a symbol of people thinking it's okay to drive too fast. When driving too fast, you cannot mitigate the hazards because you're in an environment where the unexpected can happen. You cannot control what is in front of you on the road. And that is different to a lift shaft where you can, in fact, control your environment. Unlike driving a car dangerously, where you'll never be able to mitigate it to a point where it's safe. With a lift shaft, however, you can, if you learn it correctly. So, why is it that people react so badly to lift surfing when other hobbies with the same amount of risk or even more dangerous hobbies people accept? And that's because lift surfing is a niche hobby. So why do people react so bad to very small scale niche hobbies like this? And let's just be honest here. Let's say it for exactly what it is. It is discrimination against autism and Asperger's. And I've had these sort of attacks on Asperger's since I was born. I've had it all my life and it's prevalent throughout society. And I am sick of it. And most often when people make these attacks on Asperger's, they sort of cover it up and frame it into a way to try and make themselves sound like it's kind of reasonable. When it's not. It's Asperger's discrimination and people do not accept it for what it is. So then, let's talk about a recent situation that happened in the UK with lift surfing, where certain people who are trying to make themselves sound like they were a big vigilante trying to make things better, they actually made things worse. This is the situation where a young person on the internet made themselves known that they were interested in the lift surfing hobby, and certain people reacted in a very vile and a very negative way. They attempted to pressure this young person to not surf lifts, but the way they handled it was very unpleasant, and the way they did that was by putting the young person into a national newspaper as an attempt to try and pressure him into doing what they wanted. But ultimately, what that did was the exact opposite. The thing is, this young person was at least trying to reach out. They were trying to make themselves known. They weren't just dashing into hobby without talking to anyone, which is actually what quite a few people are doing nowadays, but I'll come on to that a bit later on. But at least this young person was at least trying to make the effort. They were trying to reach out, even though the internet is not a particularly pleasant place to try and make contact, but at least they were trying. After this whole situation, did they stop wanting to surf a lift? No, they went on to surfing many lifts. The only thing that changed was they were no longer talking about it publicly. This was a far more dangerous situation, as they were no longer engaging to get the knowledge to make sure they knew what they were doing and that they were doing it safely. This is because they were bullied, and that is not acceptable. I remember when I spoke to this person at the time, and they told me about how they wanted to lift surf in secret and have a secret lift surfing group. But that is not the safest way of how lift surfing should be done. Instead, everyone should have been working together to have helped the young person and to make sure they were looked after and were well supported, and to make sure that they were armed with the knowledge so they understood what they were doing. But instead what happened was they were isolated, making them feel like they had to now do it in secret. And the thing that is most disgusting about it is the very people preaching about how it was bad that a young person wanted to lift surf. The very people that preached that it was dangerous put the young person into a more dangerous situation than they were in before. And that tells you everything about the people that preach about these sorts of hobbies. They don't want to work with young people to make sure people understand the risks and do the hobby safely. They're so obsessed with how the hobby's bad, they actually put people into a worse situation, telling people you mustn't do the hobby, which never works. It always makes a situation worse. Plus, as well as that, I'd argue that lift surfing is not a bad hobby to have. It's a hobby you have to do correct. It's a hobby you have to understand. It's not a hobby you can go into uneducated. That doesn't mean the hobby's bad. It just means the hobby has to be done right. What needs to happen is for the person interested in the hobby is to be supported in doing it. So they have a network of people as making sure they do it safely, and it's making sure they understand it. And in an ideal world, to have someone that would go with them to do the hobby, so they're not doing it on their own. And that's what should happen. Not the person should be pressured and bullied into not doing it, which ultimately doesn't end up with them not doing it, but ends up with them doing it in isolation, which is a worse situation. And to put this into perspective, let's talk about a different hobby. Let's talk about the hobby of rock climbing and abseiling. On this hobby, you get people of all ages doing it, and the hobby can get very technical, such as learning about the tolerances and limits of the equipment you're using and how to set it up correctly. Then to technical maneuvers, such as climbing over an overhang, to other technical things, such as climbing a rock face without a rope attached to a top, where instead you're then having to climb up with a rope and attaching that rope into the rock at set intervals. And also doing things such as rescuing other people who have got stuck. Some of these procedures are safety critical. You're working from height. There are risks involved. Yet you regularly see young people being taught to do these different procedures. And when a young person learns these procedures and builds up the skill to do them, and they achieve a level of proficiency in the hobby, that is celebrated as an achievement. It's celebrated as a person has built up a skill, and that is a good thing. So why are things not considered the same way on a less widely accepted hobby like lift surfing? So then, let's talk about another activity. Let's talk about high diving boards, such as a 10-metre board. If you misjudge jumping off a 10-metre board and belly flop, that can be quite dangerous because that board is high and water is not forgiving if you belly flop into it. Yet places that have these high Olympic-sized diving boards is considered a good skill for people to build up and jump off them, including young people. Young people are actually encouraged to take up diving lessons and learn to jump off such boards, and they have to learn to do it correctly so they don't belly flop. And people are going, oh, it's dangerous, don't do it, in the same way I would do with something like lift surfing. Now, with that said, let's also talk about another hobby with certain risks to it. Let's talk about driving boats. And I'm now talking about inflatable boats. Now, previously I've talked about sailing, and I've actually done both. I've done sailing boats with a sail, which is very technical sort of hobby, and I've also done inflatable boats with an engine. And I've since built up skill on those hobbies. But when I initially first started, when I first bought my first boat, things were different. And I actually put myself in danger when I first got involved in this hobby because I didn't realise what the risks were. I didn't realise how much danger I was putting myself in because most people don't seem to think of boats as being dangerous. People see boats all the time and it just looks like a normal everyday hobby. People, including myself, wasn't aware of quite what those dangers are. So when I got my boat, the first time I took my boat out onto the water, the engine cut out. I didn't have a clue what I was doing off, and the currents of the River Medway swept my boat out to sea, and I was stuck in this boat. I couldn't do anything. My boat was being pushed out to sea and there's nothing I could do. I tried to row against the current, but the River Medway's currents are so strong I couldn't row against it. I was on this little boat being swept away out of control. Eventually I managed to flag down another boat who towed me back to safety. I was in so much danger that day. I didn't even have a life jacket, but I didn't realise. When that happened, and when I made it known online when it happened, did people go, this person is dangerous, we must put him in a national newspaper to make him stop using his boat? No, they didn't. Instead, I had multiple different people message me wanting to give me advice. People saw what I was doing was dangerous and they wanted to warn me after I was putting myself in more danger than I realised, and they wanted to help me improve things and make me learn how to do it safely. People in the boating hobby were looking out for each other. They were wanting to inform people in a positive way, not in a negative way of going, you must not do that. Not being negative like what we just saw in the lift surfing hobby. They were wanting to be positive and improve things so I could go out on my boat but do it safely. And that's how things should be. People should be wanting to look out for each other and help people to do things safely, not telling people not to do something, which ultimately does nothing. Just think about this. If those people told me, do not do this, don't go out on the boat again, do you think I would have listened to them? Of course not. Telling me not to do something's not going to stop me doing it. And the same goes for many other people wanting to lift surf. Telling them not to won't stop them. Instead, we need to be helping people to make sure they fully have the knowledge to comprehend what the risks are so they understand it. So then, the final thing I'm going to say on this video, and to be honest, this is probably why I've been putting this video off for so long, is because no matter what I say here, it'll probably cause some sort of issue with someone. But the thing is, things have got so bad that staying silent is no longer an option. So I have to speak out. There's one particular lift filmer slash YouTuber who's been trying to sound like he's some kind of voice of reason on the subject, although he doesn't seem to have any grasp of the situation. The only way he can see things is the innocent children have put themselves in danger. However, he's managed to talk it in a way which makes him sound like he's some sort of reasonable party to the subject, when he isn't. He's being hateful. Now, I don't want to go over everything he said because it'll just take far too long. But one thing I really want to draw attention to is this particular statement he has made, because what he says here is fundamentally wrong.
Adult surfing lifts, I don't care, because hopefully you've got some hazard perception. It's your risk. But a kid does not have the same hindsight that we have as adults.
Notice the way he phrases it, he kind of makes it sound like he knows what he's talking about when he doesn't, and I feel like he doesn't really have experience with actually working with young people on such subjects. The first thing about what he says there is it implies that adults are automatically safe, and that is untrue. I've actually been with adults who are not at all safe. They don't have a clue what they're doing. They are not capable of keeping track of the lift. With me, they were safe just because I was there ready to stop the lift at any moment, but they were not safe to do it on their own at all. And when I put them to the test, they were not keeping track of what was going on with the lift. They did not know what was happening around them. They did not grasp how the lift worked or what keeping track of what the lift is doing means. So effectively, while they're on this lift, their actions were being based off guesswork, meaning they were not safe or in control of the situation. So the idea an adult would know what they're doing is incorrect. But the second part, his claim that any child won't have the skill to know how to do it safely, is untrue. I have worked with young people who have demonstrated that they have got it. And you could easily say that a large number of young people would not have the skills to do it safely. And that would be fine. That is actually true. But that doesn't mean you can paint everybody with the same brush just based on their age, rather than treating people as individuals. And it's down to the capability of that individual person, whether they've understood it individually. You can't just collectively group all people together based on an age. I have worked and seen in first person that some young people are capable of understanding what they're doing. I get the issue that you're going to have people who don't get it, or you don't know what some young people might be doing, but at the same time, to just age discriminate and make a broad statement, not based on someone's individual skill, but based on their age, that they somehow don't know what they're doing, it is wrong. And it stinks of hate speech of age discrimination. And there's something that's very worrying about this situation, is that in the comment section of his video, there are some young people telling him that he's right to say what he's saying and that sort of stuff. Well, at the same time, they are lift surfing themselves. And they are lift surfing in secret. Most likely because they know he won't like it if he found out, but also because they're trying to be edgy teenagers, telling one group of people they're not lift surfing while lift surfing in secret. And as well as that being the wrong way to go about the hobby, it's once again more young people putting themselves in a position where they're not reaching out about the hobby, doing it in isolation. And that is a situation that everyone should be working together to avoid. There's one other thing that has to be said. While this YouTuber is trying to make himself sound like a voice of reason and the one who is criticising lift surfing, when back in 2015 he promoted and encouraged people to surf lifts, he has completely U-turned on his opinion. But back in 2015 he was the one who encouraged me to surf lifts. My YouTube channel would have not turned in the direction that it turned if it was not for him. Back in 2015, as well as directly messaging me and encouraging lift surfing, he made videos he put online onto other people's channels called How to Surf a Lift, directly encouraging people to lift surf, but with dangerous, incorrect instructions. His videos were telling people to open up the lift doors and then step down on top of the lift. And that is dangerous for someone inexperienced. If you don't have experience with lifts and you just followed it as a step-by-step guide, you'd be on top of a lift which you did not know the situation of. You do not know if that machine was working how it was meant to work. You would be on top of a lift without verifying it. You could be out of control on top of a lift. The lift could not move. You might not be able to reach your door roller. And if someone's inexperienced, they wouldn't even know what verifying means, because his how-to videos didn't even discuss verifying. And anyone copying his videos without experience could end up on top of a lift. They had no clue what the situation was, having no idea on the fact they were relying on the machine to work, which might not work. And if it didn't work and they had to climb a shaft to reach a roller, as well as physically climbing a shaft being dangerous, it'd be dangerous doing it without knowing if that lift's going to move or not. So anyway, the point I'm just making is, if you see his videos where he talks about lift surfing like it's bad, you might not realise that how much he has U-turned and how he used to encourage it in the past. And I feel the thing that really triggered it all is that when I started lift surfing, I went full on the hobby. I've done it more extensively than anyone else on YouTube, to the number of different models of lift I've surfed, to how far and wide I've travelled, to how far abroad I went. I full on took on this hobby to an extent ultimately he hasn't done anywhere close to how far I've gone on this hobby. And I feel that was the thing that really set off his obsession towards, you know what, Ashley, I don't even want to go into it, it's not worth it. Let's just end the video there. So, to finish off this video, I've got two messages. One message to people that might be wanting to get involved in hobbies like lift surfing and train surfing, and another message to people that say things along the lines of all the hobbies dangerous. So firstly, to the people that might be wanting to take an interest in lift surfing, it's all about doing it safely. You should never just run into the hobby without understanding it, because that is where things go wrong. Lift surfing is a hobby where you have to learn and understand many things. It does get quite complicated, because it's not simply about how to open up the lift doors and get on top and drive the lift. Lift surfing is about understanding what's going on. There's many different lift logics out there, and all of them have different glitches and different little things to them where they react differently to other logics. You need to learn each logic so that you always know exactly what's going on. You should never be on top of a lift and something takes you by surprise, because you should always be aware of all of the issues around each logic. Also, when getting on top of a lift that you don't know, you're getting on a machine and you don't know how it's serviced or if it's working correctly, so you should never rely on anything till you've independently tested that each function you need to rely on actually works. And it does get a bit technical, because you have to think about what actions you're going to take and whether those actions would lead you to be in a position then going to be doing so, not knowing if that function works or not. So you have to be so careful. Now, if you are thinking of getting involved in the hobby, you need to be open and transparent, and most of all, you need to make sure people can see what you're doing. So if you do make a mistake, so that people out there would be able to give you advice if you get something wrong. If you do the hobby in isolation or in secret, people won't be able to see what you're doing, meaning that you could be doing something wrong and you don't even realise, which is why it's essential to make yourself known, whether that's uploading videos to the internet or being involved with other people. And also, if you're new to the hobby, you shouldn't go and try it on your own. You should be with people that have got more experience than you, so you can do the hobby under supervision. Now, there's people out there, like I've mentioned in this video, who will just say something along the lines of, "The hobby is dangerous, you should not do it." And while it's no bad thing to be reminded that the hobby has dangers, if those people make you feel like you should do it in secret, then those people are not looking after your best interest. They are pushing you into isolation, which is a more dangerous situation. Because ultimately, there will always be people out there that don't like what you're doing, and that is life. If you are going to be doing a hobby with certain dangers, you need to be doing it in the safest way possible. And that means you're in a position where people can tell you if they think you're getting something wrong. So you're not doing it in the dark where people don't know what you're doing. And as for my second message, to the people that say the hobbies are dangerous and you shouldn't be doing them, think about your actions. While there's nothing wrong with reminding people that it's dangerous, if you go too far and make people feel like they should be doing the hobby in secret, then you are making those people in a worse situation than before. You're making those people not be able to reach out to get help or receive help. And just telling people not to do so ultimately does not stop them from doing it. People aren't going to listen to you if you just say don't do it. Plus, the hobby's not bad just because it's got dangers to it. It has to be done correctly, but that's different from saying a hobby shouldn't be done, because there's nothing wrong with the hobby. It's about learning and understanding. And for example, on other hobbies with risks, such as rock climbing, if someone, including a young person, was to achieve something, that is considered as a positive thing. If someone's able to understand, mitigate the risks, and able to overcome the obstacles into achieving a good achievement, people think that's a good thing. And that should be the same with lift surfing and train surfing, because if someone just goes into those hobbies and doesn't understand it, that's putting themselves at risk, and that is not good. But if someone does understand it and fully makes the effort to achieve and overcome issues to do something they really want to do, then that should be celebrated as a good achievement. And as for putting people in newspapers as a way of pressuring them to not do the hobby, that is wrong. That is completely an unacceptable way of dealing with the issue. So, think about your actions. Just talking about how the hobby is dangerous and people should not do it ultimately leads to people feeling like they have to do the hobby in secret, where they're more at risk from things going wrong, where they can't get help, and that is not right.